Hi folks, Lou here, and I'm going to talk about something that you don't see reflected much in games, but is in fact very, very important. And that's the importance of subordinates in warfare. There are so many battles in the history of warfare, and I'm talking generally about pre-modern battles, where one person made a huge difference to an army. It was frequently that the soldiers were loyal to that one person, even if that person was not the king of their country or whatever. They were loyal to the commander, not to the country. So if they lost their leader, often they would then lose the battle because they would break. Their morale would break. And morale, of course, is, as Napoleon said, 3 times as important as the physical things. Sometimes even the rumor of losing a leader could cause such an adverse reaction that the battle would be lost. At the Battle of Hastings, William of Normandy had a couple of horses killed underneath him, and he had to get on another horse and wave and so on to tell his people that he was still alive. Otherwise, they would have lost that battle. Who was the second command at Normandy? I don't know that there was one, because it was all about William wanting to be king, and if he was dead, that was it. They were done. But there are so many battles where the loss of the leader or the leader running away, like Darius at the Battle of Guatemala, essentially destroys the morale of the army and they lose the battle. But frequently, second in command was not even specified, even amongst the Romans, although it was a little more common. And the Romans were loyal to the Republic, and consequently they could lose their leader and still win the battle. Now, during the Empire, they were loyal to their commander, and if the commander was killed, then that was that generally. So that made a difference between the Republic and the Empire. Now consider Napoleon's situation when he came back from the island of Elba. He had had many very competent subordinates. Marshal Nay had his legs taken off with a cannonball and died. Marshal Massena had screwed up in Spain and been cashiered to somewhere in southern France, and maybe that was a mistake of Napoleon, I don't know. Marshal Davout was a stupendous subordinate for Napoleon. But when Napoleon decided to go off to fight at Waterloo, ultimately, he decided to leave Davout in Paris as the Minister of War, rather than take him along as a subordinate. And he had good reasons for that, but as it turned out, it was a really bad mistake. Because instead he relied on Marshal Grouchy, and I may be butchering these pronunciations, of course, to take command of the group that chased the Prussians and didn't keep in touch with them and didn't come to the Battle of Waterloo, and that's one reason why Napoleon failed. He had Marshal Nay as his chief subordinate with him, and Napoleon was ill, so he had to stay in a inn or something like that back behind the battlefield and send messages out to Nay, and Nay was in control of the battlefield more or less. And Marshal Nay was the bravest of the brave and had several horses killed under him, but he was not the best general. Now, didn't Napoleon have somebody else? Well, I don't know. Marshal Murat was his big cavalry commander, but he became king of Naples, and he stuck around Naples and tried to save Naples rather than being involved with Napoleon at Waterloo. Marshal Bernadotte was one of his well-known subordinates. He became the king of Sweden and turned against Napoleon. But if Napoleon had had a better subordinate in Grouchy's position, perhaps he would have won the Battle of Waterloo. Of course, Waterloo is interesting because it's an example of a battle that indecisive in one sense, but in a larger sense, it was not decisive at all, because even if he'd won that battle, the Allies had done away with Napoleon once, and they were going to do it again. They were going to grind down France no matter what. But we like to say that Napoleon met his Waterloo, even though he was doomed from the start. So, in games, how do you reflect that? Well, you can have morale. And in my simple little game, Battle of Hastings, a lunchtime war game as it's been called, if one of the leaders, William the Conqueror or Harold II of England, dies, then there are big penalties. You can still win the game if your leader dies, but it's not easy. And you can try to protect your leader somewhat, but there's always a chance he's going to get it, because that's the way it was in real life. I'm not familiar with vast numbers of war games these days. There may be war games where the importance of the subordinate is recognized. There are certainly war games where you have multiple generals and they have different capabilities, and the better ones are ones you want in the right places. But in general, people don't want to worry about their chief guy getting killed and a subordinate having to take over. So where does this leave us for tabletop games? Well, it's something to consider, the importance of subordinates and how you are or are not going to reflect that. Thanks for listening.